Bienvenue, les aventures de Frank et Ben. Deuxième série, Frank and Ben go to Winnipeg. Quatrième histoire, Frank and Ben go to Winnipeg, part 4. Arriving at the doorstep of Aunt Petunia's, Frank and Ben are greeted by this friendly, middle-aged woman. She wears thick glasses and has trouble telling the boys apart. Sometimes she looks at Frank and calls him Ben, and sometimes she looks at Ben and calls him Frank. She is a little odd in her habits. She is what you could call eccentric. She is a bit bizarre. Frank says to Ben, "Boy, your aunt is weird." Aunt Petunia is a widow. Her husband died in the Vietnam War. All over the house are pictures of her dead husband. There are photos of him when he was a boy, and photos of him when he was a man. There are photos of him when he was in uniform, and photos of him in civilian clothes. There is even a photo of him in a bikini bathing suit. But this photo doesn't hang on a wall. Instead, Aunt Petunia keeps it in a drawer. When the boys ask her why she keeps it there, she says, "Well, isn't it obvious, dears? Don't you see that the man is almost naked?" Later she shows the boys where they are to sleep. It is a room upstairs with 2 beds. It is beside her own bedroom. It is a very well-kept room, but rather small. At one time, Aunt Petunia was expecting to have children. But that never happened because, as she eventually found out, she had a medical problem. She couldn't have any children. The doctor told her she was barren. She was very sad when she received this news. So for 30 years, the bedroom with the 2 beds in it has been unoccupied. On the beds are teddy bears and other stuffed animals. "Boy," says Frank, "I almost feel like I'm back at Uncle Bob's. Look at all these stuffed animals." "Yeah," says Ben. "Here's a giraffe, and here's a zebra, and here's a tiger. This is a room for 2 little boys." "Boy, your aunt is weird," repeats Frank. "Why does she keep all this kid stuff here?" "I don't know," says Ben. "Maybe she wants to keep the past alive somehow." Later they go downstairs to the kitchen, and Petunia is busy making an apple pie. She tells them to wash their hands, and then she will give them something to eat. When they sit down at the table, she serves them some bologna sandwiches with pickles and milk. As she rushes about doing things, she talks a lot. She says to them, "Before I took the Lord into my life, I used to treat not having any children as a curse. But now I realize that God moves in mysterious ways. I even don't blame him, as I once did, for taking my husband away from me. It's worked out in the long run because I've devoted my whole life to doing good things for people." Then she sits down with the boys. Frank is already biting into one of his sandwiches. "Stop that," she says sharply to him. "We haven't said grace yet." Looking a bit humiliated, Frank puts down his sandwich. Then Aunt Petunia closes her eyes, clasps her hands together, and fervently utters the following words: "Dear God, we thank you for the food you have given us this day, and for the strength we gain from it so that we can be your loyal servants. We also thank you for having delivered these innocent boys from the clutches of Uncle Bob. He is a man who won't change his ways despite all my efforts to bring you into his life. He's a man who, despite a good heart, would mislead these boys and bring them to ruin with his drinking and gambling and chasing after loose women. Amen. After the boys have finished their supper, they decide to go out to have a good time. Aunt Petunia starts to clear the dishes away from the table. But before the boys have stepped outside the house, she says to them, "Make sure you're both back here by 9. That's the time I go to bed." 9 o'clock, shouts Frank. It's already 7. That only gives us 2 hours to have some fun. Well, what do you mean by that? Says Aunt Petunia. Surely if you want to go for a walk or play some game, you have plenty of time. Frank shouts, "Go for a walk, play some game? That's boring. We want to go where the action is." 9 o'clock. That's final, says Aunt Petunia. Now she no longer has a friendly expression on her face. In fact, she looks rather strict and severe. She looks like a strict school teacher. In fact, she was a strict school teacher. She says to them, "If you want action, how about cutting the grass in my backyard?" After Frank and Ben have gone outside, Frank says to Ben, "This place is like a prison. We should have stayed at Uncle Bob's." "Yeah, but then we would have had to put in more fence posts." "I'll tell you what," says Frank, "let's go downtown. To hell with cutting our grass. To hell with a 9 o'clock curfew. Let's go have a good time." "I'm not sure if that's a good idea," says Ben. "If you won't come," Frank says, "then I'll go myself." So Ben finally gives in and goes with Frank downtown.